Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would give my little fight review and my fight analyzation of the very dominant performance that Mr. Shakur Stevenson just recently ended up having over the very tough and rigid fighter, the Brazilian fighter, I believe. On the know, which of course we do not see very many Brazilian boxers, at least that usually make it too far overall to the high ranks. Mr. Robson Conceicao. And of course, for those of you that do not remember Mr. Robson's Conceicao, or maybe for some of you that do, for some of us all know that paid attention to some of those 130-pound fights, we all knew that Robson Conceicao, that he gave Mr. Oscar Valdez a very, very tough fight. And there's a lot of people, including me, that believe that Mr. Robson Conceicao, that he more than likely beat Oscar Valdez in that fight. I personally scored it 7 rounds to 5 for Mr. Conceicao. But anyways, of course, this was a different fight, all in all. And of course, there was going to be certain comparisons drawn, even though Mr. Shakur Stevenson just did recently, overall, pretty much embarrass Oscar Valdez in their one-on-one matchup. But I always like to tune in to Mr. Shakur Stevenson's fights. No, he does not always necessarily deliver knockouts when it comes down to it, but Shakur Stevenson, in my view, you can truly tell that when you are watching him, that he is a truly special talent. In my opinion, Shakur Stevenson, whether you have him on your top 10 pound for pound list or not, there's some people out there that would say, what, you're crazy. How can you not have him on there? Well, the pound for pound list, in my view, is very, very competitive. And I've already told people once again that my top 5 pound for pound, I have Terrence Bud Crawford there. I have Alexander Usyk there. I have Tyson Fury there. And I have Errol Spence Jr. and Mr. Canelo Alvarez there. Those are my pretty much lock top 5 picks within my top 5 pound for pound list. So when we talk about my bottom 5 pound per pound, you're talking about certain fighters that could be there anywhere from Mr. Artur Beterbiev to Jamel Charlo to Devin Haney to Shakur Stevenson to Dimitri Bivol to Josh Taylor, overall to maybe even a couple of other fighters that I'm not currently mentioning to Anaiwa Inoue. So it is a great debate about who really is within that top 5. Once again, the only 5 fighters that I have 100% for certain, without a doubt, on my top 10 pound per pound list are the 5 that I just recently named you. But all those other ones, in my view, it's very, very overall murky in the water, in my opinion, about where they rank. But there is no doubt about it in my mind whether I would have Shakur Stevenson based off of his resume when it comes down to it, whether he would be on my top 10 pound per pound list or not. He certainly is a top 10, maybe even a top 7, a top 6. Some would even say top 5 talent within the whole world of boxing. I think that Shakur Stevenson is an extraordinary talent. Now, this move up to 135, in my opinion, is going to be very extraordinarily interesting. Now, just to talk a little bit about this fight, what did I personally have it scored? I personally scored it, at least from the rounds that I've seen, 11 rounds to 0. Unfortunately, I did not get to see the first round. I caught it a little bit late into the second round. But every round that I was seeing, Mr. Shakur Stevenson, besides some of the early rounds, he pretty much was putting a very bad beating on Mr. Robson Conceicao. And even though Shakur does not appear to have a great power, he does have enough power to back you up, and he does overall have enough of a great offensive skill set to trade with you. He is not afraid to trade with you, or at least try to put you on the back foot and come forward and try to break you down. No, he didn't get the knockout, but all in all, he was making Robson Conceicao very, very uncomfortable. So it just is what it is. I thought that the performance was very, very good. Now, the only criticism that I would have of Mr. Shakur Stevenson in this fight, if I were to have any criticisms at all, is that Mr. Shakur Stevenson, in my view, at least from some of the exchanges that I see, he does sometimes get hit a little bit too often, in my view, for his own good. Now, it's not as bad as maybe sometimes in certain Devin Haney fights or some other fights that I've seen of some other fighters that maybe could potentially be on the top 10 pound per pound list. But he does need to be careful because this transition, this move to 135 pounds, this is basically going to be him thrown to the wolves if he does end up getting into some of those bigger fights. And I've seen several times in this fight, and this is not the only fight where I have seen this, where Mr. Shakur Stevenson was hit with multiple flush left hooks and multiple flush right hands straight down the pipe or good overhand rights. What Shakur Stevenson really reminds me of, and I've already stated this, he almost reminds me of a smaller version of Terrence Bud Crawford. Very slick, very great footwork when it comes down to it. The only thing that I would not say that he is as comparable in terms of Terrence Bud Crawford is the power. I also think that, of course, for his weight division, he's faster than Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford, but you probably would expect that out of a fighter that is probably several weight classes lower. However, I see a similar Achilles heel or weakness in my view that Shakur Stevenson has that also I've seen from Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford. Now, it may overall never cause them a loss, but it could potentially cause them a loss. So, in my view, I think all in all that it is important to mention that Shakur Stevenson, in some of those certain exchanges, he overall does need to learn how to guard the left hook and the right cross a little bit better. And Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford also has a big problem sometimes with getting hit with good left hooks and right crosses as well. We've seen it in the Aegis Kavalauskas fight, where, in my view, he actually got knocked down in that fight because he willfully went down trying to hold on Aegis Kavalauskas after he got hit with a very good straight right hand. We've seen him get hurt with a good right cross, I believe, in the Yuriorkis Gamboa fight, and also, I believe, a decent left hook. So Terrence Bud Crawford and Shakur Stevenson, they fight a little bit similarly, and they are going to have to be careful when they do step up in competition because Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford, if he does face Errol Spence Jr., for example, now Errol Spence is southpaw, but still, if Errol Spence is able to get a good hit in there, when Terrence Bud Crawford does not keep his hands up, he may be hit by a punch that he may not be able to recover from. And Mr. Shakur Stevenson is going to have to watch out for that as well because this new 135-pound division is no joke whatsoever. You have great fighters there, like a Vasily Lomachenko. You have Gervonta Tank Davis. You have Devin Haney. Ryan Garcia, of course, has just recently moved up. But pretty much, certain fighters around that 135-pound to 140 range, there is very, very decent level of competition. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see how Shakur Stevenson's power will translate up to 135, how his speed will translate, and how he is going to be able to handle the skill sets of some of those fighters. I do believe that Shakur Stevenson, in my view, that he is an A-grade talent, no doubt about it. But this next transition is going to truly prove how great he actually is. What fight would I personally like to see from Mr. Overall Shakur Stevenson next? Overall, I would actually like to see him versus Vasily Lomachenko. There's been a certain amount of talk about that fight potentially happening. I think that it would be the perfect fight. I think that with Vasily Lomachenko's athleticism, his boxing ability, and his pressure that he usually puts on his opponents, I think that it would be a great test for Mr. Shakur Stevenson. It also would be a great test for Mr. Vasily Lomachenko. Because in my opinion, that is the definition of a true 50-50 fight. I would say that Shakur Stevenson would probably have the speed advantage over Lomachenko, but Lomachenko is not a fighter to be messed around with. He has excellent defense, excellent movement, excellent angles, and really when it comes to a fighter that is around his own same size, I've never even seen a fight be competitive with Vasily Lomachenko, even against the A-grade fighters that were similar in size. Now, do I think that the same thing would happen against Mr. Shakur Stevenson? Probably not. I think that even if he were to lose that fight against Lomachenko or whoever were to lose, the fight would at least be 8 rounds to 4 or 7 rounds to 5. I believe that more than likely it would be very decently competitive. But that would be one hell of a test for Mr. Shakur Stevenson. It also would be one hell of a test for Mr. Vasily Lomachenko. That is a true 50-50 fight, and I would really have to break down who I believe all in all would win that fight. Just to talk about all in all a little bit more about this fight right here, and why I believe Mr. Shakur Stevenson dominated Robson Conceicao. Well, not only do I believe that Shakur Stevenson, in my view, clearly was the better talent, and all in all, I don't think that he truly respected Conceicao's skills as much as overall, Oscar Valdez did. I think that Shakur Stevenson attacked the body very early. It was very clear that Conceicao, that he was not able to block some of Shakur Stevenson's body attacks very early on, and Shakur Stevenson seen it. I thought that he was trying to go for the stoppage, and he almost got it a couple of times. There were several times in this fight that Conceicao was very badly hurt. But Conceicao, when it comes to trying to beat Shakur Stevenson, in my view, he just does not have the type of style. He's a person that I believe is very decorated in the amateurs, at least from what I remember, and more than likely he's going to try to outbox you in the middle of the ring or at a distance. And that might be able to work with someone like an Oscar Valdez, who a lot of the times, even though he can be decent on the back foot, he can be a little bit more of a pressure fighter. But against Shakur Stevenson, Shakur was about the same size as you and about similar reach advantage as you. And in terms of the speed, there's almost no one that can beat Shakur Stevenson in terms of his speed and accuracy. it would basically be like trying to outbox Floyd Mayweather Jr. or trying to outbox Muhammad Ali when you're nowhere near the athlete that he is. It just is what it is. So in order for Robson Conceicao to win this fight, I think that all in all that he would have had to keep his hands up and pressure Shakur Stevenson the whole entire time, try to put on a good solid body attack, trap him up against the ropes, and try to get in some left hooks and some right hands, which Stevenson, at least at the moment, seems to overall get hit for a little bit more than overall what I would like him to. But it just is what it is. But that's what I would have done. But Robson Conceicao, that's just not the type of style that he has. Not saying that he overall can't push fighters to the limits or that he cannot go forward, but that is not his usual preferred style. And that's why I would love to see the Vasily Lomachenko or Gervonta Tank Davis fights against Shakur Stevenson. Because in order to beat a fighter like Shakur Stevenson, in my view, you're going to have a fighter like a Gervonta Tank Davis or like a Vasily Lomachenko. Overall, almost put on a performance like an Errol Spence Jr., to where they try to break down their opponents, round by round, go to the body very early on, and overall try to trap him up against the ropes and make him very, very uncomfortable. And it's going to be very interesting to see if Shakur Stevenson, if his speed, and all in all, if his footwork and all overall his boxing ability, if it will be enough to beat fighters like a Lomachenko and a Gervonta Tank Davis. Because Shakur Stevenson, even though I don't think that he has bad power, he just does not have the power of either of those fighters. Those fighters that I just mentioned have very, very good power. They both have a great power. I don't think that Shakur Stevenson is ever really going to have that a great power, but we'll see overall what he is able to do. He is willing to exchange here and there, and he is willing overall to put on the gas when he needs to, exponentially, which is a great trait in a fighter. Because there's a certain amount of times where a fighter does not know when they need to adjust or put on the gas overall, and it loses them fights. I think that's a part of the reason of what lost Oscar Valdez the fight so dominantly against Shakur Stevenson. As I stated into that fight, all in all, if Oscar Valdez thought that he was just going to stand in the middle of the ring and out counter Shakur Stevenson, he was very sorely mistaken. That was not going to happen. If you're going to beat Shakur Stevenson, you have to make the fight very, very uncomfortable for him. You have to try to get a body attack in there early. And then overall, you have to hope that you can trap him up against the ropes or cut the ring off and then try to get in some good left hooks and right crosses up to the head, while getting a good varied body attack in there. At least that is what I would personally lay out in my view. But it will be very, very interesting to see where Mr. Shakur Stevenson goes from here. In that 135-pound division, if he does end up getting one of those A-plus fighters or one of those A-grade fighters next, it's going to be very particularly interesting to see what ends up happening. Once again, I would love to see the Vasily Lomachenko fight for both of their careers to see who overall would be the better fighter. I also would love to see the Gervonta Tank Davis fight. I would love to see the Ryan Garcia fight, the Devin Haney fight. I wouldn't mind seeing any fights really with Shakur Stevenson at 135. Even Isaac Pitbull Cruz or George Kambosos I think would be particularly interesting, even though I don't think that either of those fighters would really stand a chance against Shakur Stevenson, because I'm not really sure if either of those guys are A-grade fighters. But it just is what it is. But it's going to be very particularly interesting overall, especially if he ends up facing Gervonta Tank Davis or Vasily Lomachenko very, very soon, if those fighters show up in the best condition possible. But we'll see all in all what ends up happening. It is going to be very particularly interesting. But all in all, just to talk about which fight do I think he's going to get next, I'm not really sure. I would hope the Lomachenko fight, but there's no guarantee. Lomachenko seems like he may want other fights elsewhere, like that of the Gervonta Tank Davis fight or the Devin Haney fight. Those fights are possible. Who knows if they'll happen when it comes down to it. Do I think that Gervonta Tank Davis is going to fight him? No, I do not. Gervonta Tank Davis seems more interested in making the Ryan Garcia fight. And Gervonta Tank Davis, and no offense against him, but it just does not seem like he is interested in a certain amount of the other A-grade fighters, at the current moment in time. Now, that could just be because he's waiting for Ryan Garcia to have that mega fight, that mega payday, or it could be because all in all that he just doesn't want to fight him. But we'll see all in all what ends up happening. But anyways, we'll see overall what happens with Mr. Shakur Stevenson. That's really about it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see all in all where he ends up going with his career. But very decent performance by Mr. Shakur Stevenson. All in all, I would just say sharpen up the defense a little bit in certain exchanges, but that could have also been because maybe he did not see Conceicao as much of a threat overall as some of his prior opponents, or at least as much of an Oscar Valdez. So we'll see on what ends up happening. But anyways, congratulations to Mr. Shakur Stevenson. That's really about it. And we'll see what happens next.